Grammar of code switching. Now, while focusing on child bilingualism and to discuss aspects of code mixing, as we said earlier, we derive our assumptions from code mixing and trying to understand how the adults actually code mix. Now, if we are talking about the grammar of code switching, Janice argues, like different other researchers, that there is no universal application of the grammatical constraints on code switching. That is, if we are saying that code switching itself follows a certain kind of norm or a certain grammar itself, then this structure cannot be validated across the globe because there exist certain variations which are often glossed over for convenience sake. And he brings into question the methodological issues with these researches. So, unlike Klein, who presents some grammatical models of code switching, Janice actually refutes them and says that they might be applicable in one context, but they might not be applicable to all the bilinguals across the globe. Now, Klein, 1967, presents an interesting idea or an interesting construct which he calls triggering. So what he says is that when a bilingual switches from the one language to the other, he or she has actually been coerced, or there is something over there as a trigger in the speech or around him or her, or something that he himself or she herself has spoken that triggers the use of the other language, and that is when the bilingual decides to switch from one language to the other. So this word might not be actually considered a part of code switching itself. That is, if you are speaking in English, you might be speaking in English, but there is this word that you use and somehow it triggers a memory, or it triggers the use of Urdu instead of English. So this is what he or she is saying. Personally, I would say that it does not have to be a word also. It might be an image. It might be someone around you that somehow triggers the shift from one language to the other. However, it is an interesting idea to explore in your own research. So Scotton and Jake also present a model of code switching, and which is an interesting model. And this model involves psycholinguistic processes. And if you're interested in that in your research, it would be a good idea to explore this in depth. So what are these researchers saying? They are saying that there is actually a matrix of language frame. A matrix is like a table. So a matrix of language frame in which different languages that the bilingual knows are positioned differently. Not always, but at least in a given context. And what happens in this MLF or matrix of language frame is that language is it is the language or the grammar of one language that is dominant, while the other language is more in a supportive role. Now, the assumption in this MLF or this matrix language frame is that two languages do not participate equally in code switching. So whenever a bilingual is code switching, he or she is using one language more than the other. That is, when we code switch, regularly in our own context. So we either code switch, for instance, from English to Urdu or from Urdu to English, but we can identify which language is more dominant, and it is dominant in terms of the grammar. So you might speak Urdu, and then you use the grammar of the Urdu, the structure of the Urdu, and within that you can make some English terms, or mix a sentence or two in English. So your ML, that is the matrix language, will actually provide the grammar of your code switching, while the embedded language, or the EL, will provide certain elements that can be embedded in your discourse. But having said that, whenever you try to embed this other language into the matrix language, then the rules of the matrix language actually apply, and you do not use the grammar of both languages. Rather, you use the grammatical structure of one language, within which the other components of the language are embedded.